Okay, so I'm Angela Beard, and I'm here on behalf of Sanford Institute of Philanthropy, which many of you may know and some of you may not, is a national philanthropy that offers fundraising training to strengthen the nonprofit sector. Mr. Denny Sanford, who is part of one of our national university donors, saw a need in the nonprofit sector to really bolster fundraisers in their education, probably because of the story goes, the lore at National is that he is a man of means and had been asked for money so poorly in his own personal life that he wanted to strengthen the capability of those of us in this sector to do it right. So he founded several institutes around the country. They're all over. There's one in New York. There's several in California. There's one in Florida, et cetera. And I, City U, host Sanford here, and I of course manage the team of one for that. And we present fundraising workshops, seminars, online webinars, and all kinds of modes of education to try to get fundraisers more educated about fundraising. Anybody in the fundraising here? So in fundraising and in many fields, I'm sure. Hello, it's okay. Um, the end of the year is really you're done. You've fundraisers. There are a lot of galas in the fall. There are big auctions and dinner fundraisers, etc. And then you go right into crazy fundraising time because all the donors want to make their gifts before the tax deadline. So by about 30% or 40%, gifts come in December. So fundraisers are really burnt out at this time. And I thought as a real education piece to them, we would have our wonderful faculty teach them how to manage that so they can still enjoy their holidays so they don't crash, January 1. Um, and so I spoke with Ellen, and our counseling team very generously offered to present this workshop for us. And by the way, by way of logistics, folks will probably be trickling in because we have a good 23 folks registered today. Yay. So let me introduce Corey Beal and Joyce Finn, who are on our counseling team, and their bios are pretty impressive, so I'm going to share them with you. So Joyce Finn is an associate professor and associate program director in the Masters of Counseling program here at City University of Seattle. She received her Doctorate of Education in Counselor Education and Supervision from the University of Montana. Joyce is a licensed mental health counselor in Washington State and Montana. She's a nationally certified counselor and certified supervisor and has almost 15 years of clinical counseling experience in different settings, including community mental health agencies, private practice, school settings, and work as a crisis counselor. All this is so impressive to me. Joyce has conducted trainings of trainers on integrative response to substance abuse, mental health, and HIV/AIDS treatment. She's certified trauma treatment, sex offender treatment, and is an impact certified problem-solving treatment of depression practitioner. Joyce has worked as a language and cultural training coordinator for different volunteer organizations. Her other research interests include looking at HIV/AIDS' impact on the social support structure, extended family systems, especially in developing countries, perspectives on multicultural issues in higher education, teaching social justice teaching in counselor education programs, gender and women issues and the effects of trauma in women and children exposed to domestic violence. Joyce has published in peer-reviewed journals, including the Journal of Counseling and Development and the Journal of Community Psychology. She has contributed chapters in books, Social Class and Helping Professions, The Clinician's Guide, to navigating the landscape of class in America and supporting the success of adult and online students, proven practices in higher education. That's just Joyce. Corey's equally awesome. Corey is a PhD, LG, LPC, and CCACS, is a licensed professional counselor in the state of Georgia, a licensed mental health counselor in the state of Washington, and a nationally certified counselor and approved clinical supervisor through NBCC. He earned his PhD in counselor education and practice with a cognate in multicultural supervision and practice from Georgia State University, and was selected as an NBCC Minority Fellow in 2014. He has been in clinical practice for 10 years in various settings, including IOP, college counseling centers, and private practice. His research and professional interests center on LGBTQI+ and trans individuals in counselor education, and supervision. More specifically, his publications focus on sexual and gender minority counselors and the experiences of minority stress, as well as experiences coping and burnout. Perfect, right? Corey currently serves as the chair of Special Committee on Public Policy and as a board member of the Association for Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, and Transgender Issues in Counseling. He currently is an associate program director and associate professor of City University of Seattle. You couldn't be in better hands. I'm going to sit down and learn how to avoid burnout myself. Thank you so much to our wonderful presenters today.
Good morning. We are excited to be here with you. Hopefully everyone can hear me. I don't know how many people are online, but I'm trying to avoid the microphone if I can. So can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Awesome. All right.
We don't know whether those guys can hear us because the authority was supposed to use the mic.
We're going to run with it unless we hear feedback online that we need to have the mics. Otherwise, we're going to keep rolling. They can hear me? Okay, good. All right. So today we are talking about burnout, and as far as teaching styles, I think Dr. Joyce and I share a very similar style in that our classrooms tend to be what we call a flipped classroom or interactive based. And as such, I think we have a total of about 6 slides. Most of our dialogue today is going to be interactive based. We want you to do all the talking, and we're just going to be facilitating. So hopefully this works out the way we want, and we will just not talk as much as possible. So I do have a session outline. We'll talk generally about what burnout is, as well as how people individually experience burnout. Our intent today is to talk specifically about your experiences of burnout rather than burnout just conceptually. Because, again, from a teaching perspective, when the material is personally meaningful to you, you retain that information more. So our intent is to make this personally applicable to you and your experiences in both this setting, maybe previous settings. So we're going to build on some of our experiences with burnout. We'll look a little bit at what the literature states. Again, just kind of a conceptual framework of what burnout is. It's housed in vocational literature. It's been around for a long, long time. As long as people have been working, they've been burning out. And so it started in one sector and has been translated across multiple disciplines. So we've looked at attorneys, we've looked at health and human services. All folks in all disciplines experience burnout. And so a lot of the burnout inventories have just been modified to be specific to that field. So today we're talking more generally about burnout, but we could look at, there's actually an education burnout inventory. So Maslach's inventory has been translated into higher ed as well. So if you ever want to just look at some of those questions, they're available online. Then we're going to shift to self-care, because the literature states that self-care is the one mediating factor that helps to prevent burnout across all settings. So we're going to look at what that means and how we apply that, again, individually in your lives. So lots of interaction. Lots of questions along the way. If something's unclear or you have some follow-up you want us to answer as we kind of go along, just raise your hand and we'll stop and answer questions, because I feel like that's more valuable than kind of adhering to what's up here. Sound good? Cool. Let's go. All right, so what is burnout? Take a guess. Don't look up here. Just take a guess.
Just wearing yourself down.
Just wearing yourself down, worn out.
Overworked.
Overworked.
Overstressed.
Overstressed. Tired. Emotionally, physically, and otherwise. Cranky. It's real. What else?
Very emotional.
Very
Yeah.
emotional. You
Very
feel
emotional.
unpredictable. You don't know what's going to happen.
Which
You
can
don't
be
know
a
what
little
will set you
scary
off.
for your
Yeah.
coworkers.
Exactly. Yeah.
You don't know how they're coming in. So
Less patient.
less patience? Absolutely. Yeah, what else?
What else from that table? The ladies here taking more.
You've had lots of experience with this.
Who seems more stressed?
You're taking on so much that you're exhausted and you feel like there's no hope or no, you're taking on so many important things that you feel like you have to take care of all of it at once, and you feel like there's no hope for that.
Yeah. So difficulty saying no. Sometimes we compromise our boundaries on that, for sure.
One of our online participants says not taking a break, doing too much in too little time.
Yes, for sure.
I think it's also important to realize your boundaries, like you said, but knowing how much you can take on without getting to that point where you don't know which tasks to follow up with first, how to follow through with that you're taking on, and just kind of setting up a timeline of what needs to be done. Like you really have to prioritize your tasks that you take on. If you do it too much, too fast, you lose all track of all of them.
Yeah. That's a good point. And sometimes we don't know our limitations until we've exceeded them, right? So sometimes those boundaries we talk about, having good boundaries, sometimes we're not aware that we've crossed our boundaries until they've been crossed. So we talk in counselor ed oftentimes about coming in either no boundaries or really, really strict boundaries. And either extreme kind of sets us up for limitations. When you come in no boundaries, it's very hard to build boundaries back up, right? You know this if you're one of those that always says yes. People will take advantage of that in certain circumstances, and you find yourself limiting your energy and your ability to be present fully in all situations. The same is true for folks who have really strict boundaries. You kind of have to gradually chip away. So what's kind of the middle ground? Is there a middle ground? I think oftentimes we don't know it until we've gone to the other side of it that we don't necessarily feel good about. All right. What else? Anything else that sticks out for you? So in terms of the literature on burnout, they kind of break it down along these three: physical, emotional, and cognitive. These three domains, and then those are expanded out to include specifics of how we might see burnout occurring in our everyday life. All right, and again, this is one of those, we teach burnout as kind of a proactive, we want you to engage in self-care. Oftentimes we don't see folks before they get burned out. In counseling, we don't see people who are doing well and managing their stress. We see the other side of it, when the stress has gotten too bad, when they are burned out. And so some of this is recognizing we want you to take a more proactive approach, and at the same time recognizing some of us may currently be burned out. And so we have to kind of manage that as well. All right?
So I guess to say what a great moment to be talking about this, because we are like 2 weeks from ending the quarter, and for you guys to show up to talk, just to get this information, I thought it was great. I wanted to say that. Yeah, I think like in the area, the three areas that Dr. Corey said, Dr. Corey, that he pointed out, the physical, cognitive, emotional places, and then the sphere of the spiritual, I call it the spiritual, and the outside, because the spiritual, I always look at it as the inside, and then I also look at the action as what we do in order for us to be well. And so looking at this area, the physical, it's like like the outside, what's going on, how are things coming at us, and then how are we thinking also in terms of what we are doing? How are we even thinking? Because by the time we burn out, it looks like most of the time when I burn out, I know that I wasn't thinking whatever I was doing, whatever I was taking on. I wasn't thinking. I was just going, okay, I'm going to do that. You ask me, oh yes, I'll do that. Oh yes, I'll do that. And at the end of it all, that's when my thoughts come back. But emotionally, I'm totally gone. And by that time, I'm thinking, am I going to be good with everybody around me? And so when I start getting irritated, when I start losing it, as my daughter will remind me, Mom, you're being snappy. And so when I'm being snappy, I know. So at work, sometimes, when you start looking at others and going, yeah, hello, hi. It's like, hi, not the hi, the usual hi. I always check myself when I come to that place where Dr. Corey says hi, and I go, hi. I'm not connecting with Dr. Corey. Then I know, okay, what's up with myself? So I like the way we have to look at the physical, the cognitive, and the emotional. But are we paying attention in the environment that we are working? Are we getting all the stress from everybody else around us?
So what we wanted to do is, and I'm going to preface this with, there are some things on here that you may not necessarily want your coworkers to see. Because one of them, the reality of burnout is that sometimes folks around us are contributing to that. So you might have to do the old school, like covering your paper if you're a little bit embarrassed because maybe someone around you is on your team and you don't want them to know. But we're going to have you go through an inventory. The MassRock Burnout Inventory, like I said, is kind of the flagship inventory that's used to measure vocational burnout. And you have to pay for it. We didn't want to pay for it. So we grabbed a version that's free that measures some of the same constructs. And we're just using it again for kind of a conversation starting point. What I'd like to ask is that you go through these and you're just checking. Don't spend a lot of time thinking about it. With inventories, sometimes we think about what we call the social desirability. We answer according to what we think we should answer rather than how we actually feel. So go with your gut. And even if it feels a little icky when you do it, just go with it. There's a front and a back, 15 questions. We also have these on the PowerPoint for the people online, so we're going to pull it up in just a second so they can follow along. But we're going to pass these out. If you will just start checking these front and back, and we'll talk about these in a second.
My folks are set.
Joyce, can you go to the first question slide so they can see? Yeah. So Angela, if you can let them know online that this is the first 7 questions, we'll give them a couple minutes and then we'll move to the next so they have all of them. For those of you who are done, if you could do 2 things. One, I know this is math and you probably hate that. These actually count for certain points. So not at all is a 1, rarely is 2, going up to 5. If you could give yourself a total for all 15 questions, if you need to get out the calcs, I get it, please do. If you'll get a total, and then the second thing is circle any of these that really stick out for you. In other words, they're really significantly impacting your work, your stress, etc. Because we want to talk specifically about those. Angela, are we good to go to the next version online? They need the second set.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Is anyone still going? We need a couple more minutes. How are we doing online?
Everybody's good.
Okay. This is kind of an arbitrary, let's see how crispy you are. All right? Crispy versus burned out.
See how great you are.
Anyone comfortable sharing no burnout? If you're not burned out whatsoever, you have permission to leave and keep doing what you're doing.
And I'm taking a spot.
Good work. You come up and tell us. No one? All right, so we're all at some level of approaching crispy, maybe burned out. Okay? How many people are comfortable 19 to 32? There's a little bit of burnout going on. We're starting to approach it. Okay? All right. Good. Just a little crispy, not too much yet. All right, how about middle? 33 to 49. Be careful. Ah, interesting. Okay. This is what we call kind of the tipping point. This is when we're becoming cognizant of the fact that it's there. Now we need to figure out how to bring it down, because if we keep going the way we're going, we'll be in these two, which is the uh-oh. Do something now. Right? The last thing is to do something about this urgently. All right? Anyone in the 50 to 59? Okay.
I need to go home.
And to bed.
Yes.
I need to go with my dog.
Yeah.
They're bad.
We should have had a therapy dog.
Troy would never
How about this one, 60 to 75? Anyone in that one? That's the most extreme.
Not that bad.
They're awesome.
Okay. Okay. They're not here. They're burned out. They're laying in bed
They're
somewhere.
working, they're not taking the time for self-care.
Yeah. Okay. Good. So let's talk specifically about the inventory. What are some of the ones that stand out for you that you're comfortable sharing? Anyone want to share maybe ones that they circled that just feel particularly? Yes. Sophia, Craig, either one.
So I think the ones that I circled were more about myself, like how I feel as far as being overly like achievement than I am. I feel like they're more about self versus city.
Gotcha. Okay. Good. Thank you.
Mine are harder and less sympathetic with people than perhaps they deserve. I don't have a whole lot of patience at some points with people because I can barely handle myself, let alone their issues that they have going on. And the other big one was I feel that I don't have time to do many of the things that are important to doing a good quality job.
Yeah. Anyone else circle that one? Yeah.
Yeah.
Figure that'd be a big one. What else, Angela?
Online, not having enough time to plan, which I wasn't thinking that that was a sign of burnout, but it's something I miss.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Getting easily irritated by small problems that normally I wouldn't care about. Getting really snappy about it.
Right.
Happy. The politics and, other folks' personalities that help, that are railroading you, so that was my big one.
Politics and bureaucracy.
Yes.
Yeah. Which doesn't happen in many organizations, right? It's just,
Yeah.
Oh, I was just going to say, this is my first time in higher ed, so being in the wrong organization or wrong profession, I'm used to more corporate settings for marketing, so
Yeah.
this was all very new, and there are some political aspects to it that I wasn't expecting, and it's been hard to overcome.
yeah. Good.
Oh, somebody laughed over there.
Oh, just with the other thing. Sorry, I wasn't listening.
You weren't fully present.
I wasn't.
You're the one that's not burnt out. How are you?
She's a little,
Little.
just a little burned out.
She was saving my life.
She's the safest right now.
Yeah.
She's the one who has a chance.
The only one.
No, we're gonna fix it. That's our whole purpose today. Is no one is gonna be burned out when we're done here.
Mine was I feel run down and drained of physical or emotional energy. I'm always tired.
Yeah.
Always. There's
Yep.
not even. I can nap right now.
Yeah.
Ooh, nap break.
Is that what you have to do?
Most of the time, they're always full.
So what we wanted to do, again, this gives us a conceptual framework. We know where we're at now in terms of measurable burnout. Some of us a little bit more than others. Don't want to call anyone out, but yeah, not looking at you. So we want to spend this time talking specifically about what does burnout look like for you? What does it feel like? And we thought we would do this in our small groups. Well, this is a small group. That's a big group, so y'all might have a little trouble getting everyone. I want to spend a couple minutes for us just to talk about these questions. So we've got some pens, we've got some little sticky notes. If you would, maybe spend a couple minutes individually thinking about how do you know when you're burning out? What does it look and feel like to you? Are you aware of it, or do others have to point it out? How does it affect your work, your relationships, both personal and professional? Other areas of your life that are affected, and is there a way to detect it before it sets in fully? So you don't have to answer all of these. Pick ones that stand out for you. Jot down some individual notes, and then we're going to talk about these in our small groups and then bring them back to a big group. All right, so spend a couple minutes on these. I'm going to get out of the way.
You haven't met
Okay, so let's talk about the themes that came up at your table.
Yeah, there's been some
We would like for you folks to share with us what you discussed and what you thought was so similar, with each other as you talked about it. So any group that, okay.
The thing that most of us had in common was when we're really stressed and burning out, we don't talk to our coworkers when normally we would chat and be very friendly.
So you just pass each other like loaded buses?
Yeah,
Yes.
or we don't leave our desk. We just sit there with headphones on.
So you're not engaging with other folks.
We're there, but not there.
There but not there. Okay. Anything else in your group? So the others, do you relate to these, or do you have other things also that have come up for you guys?
This is the snippy table.
Oh, Snippy. Okay, I like Snippy. So give us Snippy. What's going on?
After a certain emotional point, it's over, it's done. We flip a switch and we say, nope, okay, all done.
Okay. So everybody at that table, that's something that was you had in common?
More so with family members necessarily, not necessarily,
At work?
yeah. It's not politically correct to be snippy at work.
So whatever's going on for you is also affecting your family members. Okay. Anything else?
For us, we were talking about setting up boundaries at work with people because if we're starting to burn out at work, it usually involves our whole team and it affects our whole team. So when we get to that point, it's hard to reach out to someone within your group to kind of seek more advice or even ask for help. Sometimes we just shut down and keep trying to do what we're doing. And if it becomes more personal, it's hard to open up to them. If they ask us what's wrong, we usually just go, I'm fine. Keep going on with your day. We don't really communicate all of that to someone.
They would give it all at home.
Yeah.
like we were saying.
So it's easier to have that be dealt with at home. And at home, you're snapping at people that have nothing to do with what actually triggered that stress. So there's some similarity in the closing down, like not wanting to talk, not wanting to communicate. And so, yeah, okay, keep saying whatever you're saying.
We're also
because
not
I was gonna
present.
go into solutions. Yeah,
We're not fully present when we're
not
burned
present.
out. I mean, a lot of us talk about we're being physically here, mentally we're completely gone. And even when we're outside of work, some of us also struggle with being present in that moment, enjoying life outside of work with family members or doing activities. And, some of us also struggle when we're out doing things, even with friends maybe, we're still thinking about work, what we're stressed out about. We can't even let that go.
So it sounds like there's no separation from what is triggering that stress. And then, but yet, where it starts from, you're not addressing it. And where you're dealing with it is at home with your family or friends. Sounds like something similar to you guys.
We also said because it's affecting all areas of our lives, we're not doing anything really well. So like not doing stuff at home really well, not doing work things really well, everything is kind of affected by it. So we're not working at our full strength.
So in that stressed state at work, even though you are disconnecting with, from other people, it doesn't necessarily mean that what you are doing is actually good work, because the stress is also impacting that. Interesting. Everybody can share that. So that is the switches over there. Like when you switch it off, does it feel the same way? And Vicky, you shared that at home, but does that also impact you at work?
Oh, yeah. Definitely. I mean, especially if you're close with your team, they know what's going on. I mean, we've been together for a while, so it definitely impacts work and it impacts your ability to work with students. And your mind is other ways. Not present piece is really true. I'm watching the clock because I have a conference with a student at noon. And it's because you have to try to get everything in. You can't pause.
Okay. So it sounds like the themes that we're identifying, they're impacting us at work, at home, and then even when we are at work, it's impacting the job that we're doing. And then if at all you engage with students directly, it also is impacting your ability to engage with the students. So there's a theme here. Corey, Dr. Corey.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up because the theme that I'm hearing is, I think the message sometimes gets a little lost when we're talking from a business perspective that you have to separate personal and professional, right? That's kind of the consistent message is that when you show up, this is your professional self. And then outside of work is your personal self. And from a counseling perspective, we always say that's impossible. So it really is in conflict with a lot of the business models, which are very relational focused from counseling, not necessarily business. Business being more administrative, kind of the bureaucracy part of that burnout, right? Less relational in some cases or some settings. And so how do you balance professional and personal, knowing that they're both affected simultaneously when someone's burning out? How do you address that in a professional setting? What are your thoughts?
How are you surviving?
I think too, it like really depends on your management.
Yes.
So if your management is willing to have those conversations and be open to that, then I think it's easier. But when they're not, it's really, I mean, you feel alone.
Good point.
I think finding like a support group. Like I think it's very important at this time. Like if you are feeling like you're on the edge, you're feeling like you're going to fall. It's good to reach out to someone you can trust and find someone that not even like a coworker. It's good to have someone that will understand your situation, like from work, but also like friends that you can count on. Because it's very helpful. Like for me, it's very helpful when I reach out to someone and I've been out and then this is what I'm feeling and I don't know what to do. And then it's good to hear from other people that, like they're supportive and they tell you, different options, how to feel better, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Other thoughts?
And I can imagine that would be so hard too, because the other thing that folks are sharing is that when you feel that way, every one of you is saying something about isolating yourself from everybody else. So how do you get the courage to reach out? Like what does that take for you to reach out to others when you are going this direction? Yes.
For me, it usually takes like a snapping point. Like, I don't argue with my husband a lot, but we'll get into a huge fight and we're like, okay, now is the time where obviously something serious is happening either at home or at work, and it's not ideal, but for me, that's what usually happens. It's a snap. It's a real snap, or I'm just like, we're arguing about something completely stupid, and I'm like, wow, we just had like a really serious argument about nothing.
Yeah. And the reality is, we have various departments here that are what I would consider to be very numbers driven, right? We're talking about the Philanthropic Institute, we're talking about enrollment, we're talking about advisement and retention. And so going back to what Sophia said, what happens when your manager is very much coming from this is what we need to get, right? And we're burning out in the process. Do you just go to your manager and say, you know what? Sorry about that. I'm a little burned out. We'll get back to that next quarter when I'm fresh again.
Or tomorrow.
Or tomorrow. We'll get to that tomorrow. Yeah.
I was just going to say for some of the folks online, for the fundraising community, that's critical because it's December 31. They have goals to make, or there's going to be a deficit. They can't just say, well, I need some time off.
Yeah. Yeah, and it becomes almost a catch-22 because some of the things that we've done in organizational psych is we talk about that very fact that we can push people even as they're continuing to burn out, and then what do we know happens? Their production goes down, their commitment to the position, to the team, all of that starts to falter, which causes things, as we've talked about, to start gradually imploding. Or we, figure out a way to kind of mediate or mitigate that before it gets to that point. That's the piece I feel oftentimes is missing, is sometimes we're not comfortable sharing that we're getting crispy, we're about to approach that tipping point. Sometimes people aren't even aware of it until it's happened. And so there's this fine line we walk where maybe we're having those dialogues with our husband or our partners or our spouses but we're not having them at work, and work is where it's really happening. And so, does anyone have any thoughts on, is there a way to have a discussion about the fact that you're burning out or other team members are burning out in a way that's well received?
I think it depends on the relationship you have with that individual. Because I know for some of us, we can be very direct with each other. Others, you can't be as direct. You kind of have to carefully approach them and word things in a right way that they don't feel offended or you're coming after them.
Yeah. Can I share from a supervisor's point of view? I've often supervised staff. I could see we're burning out, and I would say to them, "You need to take a few days off," and they would refuse. They're like, no, there's so much to do, and I've got goals to make, and those are the kind of people who are going to implode. But you don't want to force them; they're adults. So that's something I would love to hear more about, too, to keep them from completely burning out and crisping.
Yeah. For sure, we'll definitely chat more about that as well. Other thoughts, though?
I mean, my thought would be just to be honest. You know, if anything, your approach can be based on who you're approaching.
Yeah.
But if you're honest, then anyone can be glad to hear, you know, what you have to say, and you know, hopefully that turns into wanting to help, and whatever that looks like. What I appreciate about the team that I'm on is that we can easily approach each other because we've built that honesty and respect with one another to say, this is what I'm dealing with. One, what are you doing differently, or how are you coping? Because we're on the same team, we're probably all feeling burned out with numbers, if that's what we're talking about. Or if it's specifically one person, like, hey, this is what I have on my plate, like, you know, if you need me to jump on this project, can we delay the project? Can we have someone else help out instead of me? Whatever that looks like, just being honest about the situation.
So that sounds like there's some relational stuff that is going on with your team. You know, talking about how important relationships are. Because if you have good relations with your team members, it's easy to feel safe to say something about what's going on for you. Yeah. Yeah, you had something.
I think going back to what Rick said, like when you do have those relational people in your group, you know their personalities, so you know if you can approach them or not. But then also we have our own personalities, so some of us may be able to talk to someone, or not like really confrontational, but just we're more direct as like our own personality, and some of us aren't. So I think like learning who you are and how you can go about that in your own personality style.
Yeah.
Without feeling bad or.
I think a really hard part is just like asking for help before you truly need it.
Yeah.
Because once you get to the burnout phase, it's a lot harder to recover for you and your team. So asking before, saying, wow, I'm really stressed out, like I need help with my caseload, all the tasks all my responsibilities. I need help from my team.
Yeah.
That's hard for people to ask for help.
Yeah.
And it's such a great point. It kind of transitions to what I was going to say with regard to Angela's question, which is, what's preventing someone from acknowledging that they're starting to burn out, or that they need some help, or they need support, or that they're just not showing up 100% for various reasons? What are your thoughts? We see clients for this all the time. What's one of the biggest things that prevents people from asking for help?
Ego.
Ego, pride. That's exactly what it is. There's some message, social, culturally, or otherwise, that dictates to ask for help means that you're weak, or that you're not doing your job, or that you're more expendable. There's a concern that you may lose your job as a result. All kinds of catastrophizing scenarios that people create. If I ask for help, that means they're going to take things from me and I'll never get them back, and then I'm the most expendable on the team, we've heard these inner dialogues from folks in counseling. And the question, I don't know about Dr. Joyce, that I ask is, why? What's fueling that conversation?
What are the fears behind?
What's your fear? Yeah. What's the biggest fear?
I think it's vulnerability, like
Yeah.
being able to be vulnerable with other people to say, yeah, I need help. And I don't know, that's just a huge step, like in therapy and stuff, you learn about that.
Yeah, it is. It's definitely a vulnerable place for sure. Absolutely.
I think for me and other new employees, it's that whole thing of wanting to present yourself as being competent enough to handle the job that has been given to you.
I'm just wondering also, okay, at CityU, there's diversity. Well, I'll say there's diversity because there are some groups that are not well um, represented, but there is diversity. So that cultural aspect too, and some people come from cultures where reaching out to others is not one of the easiest things to do because culturally you're supposed to, like say men, I'm giving an example from like men that come from where I come from, usually will not reach out because they, they, they feel like they will be judged as not knowing what they're doing. And so they'll keep working, like overdoing it because they want to meet standards of people that can walk in and not do anything, and people wouldn't even mind, them. And so, like, when we are thinking about this, I'm always thinking of like people that come from those cultures where the reaching out is very difficult. So I wonder, what your thoughts are around that, whether you have encountered that, whereby you can actually notice someone who's from a different culture, and you can't tell whether they're burnout, they're burnout or not, or they're stressed out or not. So, like, I don't know what your experiences are with that.
For our side, the SSAs, we mostly deal with students who are online. So when you're in a virtual format, you don't have that opportunity to kind of meet them in person, to know them a little bit better. It's usually just cut to the chase about registering them. What classes do they need?
Yeah.
And very rarely do a lot of those students even reach out to ask you, like, hey, this is who I am. I saw your introduction. Just kind of want to connect with you. It's kind of few and far between. So when the students don't communicate with you, then you have absolutely no idea what's going on for them until something bad happens and they reach out at the last minute.
Yeah. It's hard. Just think about that too, like when you're thinking about, and if you are engaging with students too, and sometimes you can be stressed out because you're trying to reach all these students and they're not reaching out back to you when they're supposed to, and then you might assume a whole lot and it might frustrate you, and just the job of trying to reach out to students that are not coming to you, but culturally that's like your authority, and so for them to reach out to you might be a big to do thing, and it can stress you out too.
And speaking to that is, I've worked with a lot of international students, and like you're saying, it's inappropriate to ask their instructor, can I get additional time? Like, I'm struggling, what can I do? And I think an important thing is just asking people, not probing for information, but have you talked to that person? Have you talked to the instructor that you're having this issue with? And if their immediate response is, oh no, that's not appropriate, then trying to help them troubleshoot, okay, well, if they don't feel comfortable, what will they feel comfortable with, and how can you help them that way? But if you're not asking any probing questions without being intrusive, you're not going to get anywhere.
So I just want you to think about that, but then also think in terms of when you are burned out, how are you going to work with these folks, or every other student? Because there are some people here that maybe don't work directly with students, but there are some people that somehow you work with students, and so when you are burned out, so how do you maneuver that? Protocol.
Do you feel like we have established relationships in our teams where we can advocate for one another? If people are feeling burned out but are not comfortable saying themselves? Or do you feel like that's an area where maybe we need to grow a little bit? Or does it feel awkward, maybe being in that position? Maybe that's not what they necessarily want. What are your thoughts on that? In terms of if we're working as a team, is it possible to advocate for or on behalf of someone else?
Depends on your department.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't have done that in my old department, but I've definitely done that in my current one.
Yeah.
Yeah, marketing, we're so small. I mean, there's literally 4 of us and Mika, and so you think we were very close, but we're actually kind of split. You have Ken and I doing all the back end stuff, and then Christy and Bill doing all the front end stuff. So we're not as close on that end.
Yeah.
I think it also depends on the person because, for instance, anybody that's in advising, if they're having any trouble whatsoever and they don't feel comfortable, they're more than welcome to come to me and I will advocate for anybody. But I have that personality. I'm okay with confrontation. I'm okay with, being the bulldozer that needs to happen. So it doesn't matter what role I'm in.
But that's a very real, I mean, again, some of this is individualized for the person who's experiencing it, individualized from the team that's working and the dynamic that's been established. So there really isn't a textbook answer that applies across the board. One of the things that we talk to clients about is self-advocacy and empowerment. Feeling comfortable speaking up for themselves and saying, hey, you know what, I am crispy. My production level is going down. I'm having a lot of conflict with coworkers, with family members, with friends, and I need to do something about that. The reality of that is they don't feel comfortable speaking up for themselves. And so it's a catch-22. How do you take a proactive approach to prevent burnout, which is what we want to do? Everyone knows the effects of burnout. It's not a good thing in the name, burnout. But we oftentimes don't get that proactive stance. We get the reactive, now I need to undo the burnout. But the steps to preventing it are the parts that are still missing. So how do we prevent burnout? That's what we're kind of shifting our focus to for a few minutes, unless there are other questions before we move on.
Or comments?
Comments.
Mine's quiet right now. No.
I think a situation where you can expect that you're going to be burnt out. This is just a busy time of the season, and I have X, Y, and Z going on. I am preparing, or I know that I'm going to be burnt out this whole month.
Yep.
And like for me, I sometimes I'll tell my husband, I'm like, hey, I need you to do a lot more than what you're doing right now, because if he doesn't have as much on my plate, so that I'm not coming home even more stressed, and then like, oh, and then I still gotta make dinner, and oh, still gotta clean up, and so that's just a personal conversation that I've had.
Yeah.
And so being able to prepare to not add to the stress while I'm being burnt out,
Yeah.
I'll ask for help, or I'll know ahead of time, like this whole month I'm just not gonna go out, and I'm gonna stay in because I either need to unwind, or I just don't have time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when you say it that way, though, I'm thinking, is burnout inevitable? Is it something that you can work at not having? Or is it something that...
Yeah, I see it as inevitable.
Yeah. That's what crossed my mind when you said, yeah, we prepare for the burnout.
Yeah, I mean, it's always a part of my year that I'm going to be burned out. I don't know. Maybe it's just me.
Like maybe the border.
And then we have to spend time recovering from the burnout,
Yeah.
right? And then anticipating the next burnout from that. I mean, I think it's a really valid point in terms of knowing yourself, knowing your stress level, knowing where you work, the times of year that are more stressful. I think that applies across all settings. And just taking a proactive approach of, look, I'm not going to be fully present for everything. Letting friends know that, we may not see each other as much mid-December because there's all this stuff going on. Rather than, everyone's reaching out to you and saying, hey, I haven't seen you in 4 weeks. Are you alive? So you've learned to kind of navigate some of that as you're approaching those stressful times. Do you feel that that helps mitigate some of that burnout, or does it still feel kind of icky that you're always approaching burnout?
I mean, it always feels icky, but it helps.
Yeah.
Because there's just one less thing to worry about, or scheduling time. 6 days a week, I'm going to be busy from 8 to 8, but the Sunday, like nothing.
Yes.
So still having a balance
Yeah.
when you have a lot on your that you're just going on.
For sure. And that's what we want to get to, because we wanted to spend the last portion of this talking about what do we do to help alleviate burnout, and are there any of these that we can use proactively to prevent the onset of burnout? Yeah. Yeah. Just to kind of summarize, and I think some of these have already been discussed, but these are the big kind of headers that we see from a professional perspective. People report feeling exhausted. That can be physically, emotionally, cognitively. Cynicism, which you know it when you hear it, when you feel it, when you see it. It's very apparent. For people to become overly cynical, it's a result of burning out. One of the things that I like to talk from an organizational perspective is that when others are presenting in that way, when they're looking exhausted or they're showing up as overly cynical, learning not to take that personally is a big part of it. And sometimes you have to learn this dynamic with folks, is that you say something and then they interpret it and give you something back that then adds to, right? And recognizing that sometimes it's not about us. It's something that they're going through or something they're experiencing. And learning to reframe that way can help us let some of that go, but it also helps not add to what that person's experiencing. So sometimes I have coworkers who show up and I know something's going on. And I can ask, is there anything you want to talk about? No, it's fine, I'm fine. Just learning to let it go. It's not something personal, it's just when they're ready, if the relationship is there, they'll talk to you about it. But it's not a reflection on something that's happening for us right now.
Another example, like for us, our students go to internship sites, and at internship sites, they have supervisors. So I always, like when I'm teaching internship with my students, I always warn them in advance that, when you go out in the field, sometimes supervisors that you have might be very cynical. And in most cases, they might end up being unethical as well. But I tell them that it's because maybe they've been in the field for a long time and they're not doing good self-care, and they just become so cynical. And then, because some students have come back sometimes and talked about their supervisor, but my supervisor seems like she doesn't even give a hoot. And I said, so those kinds of supervisors, sometimes they've reached that cynicism place because they've been in the field for so long, and the ethics to them doesn't even count. And so I prepare them, because sometimes our supervisors sometimes can be, if you are in an environment where not many people are happy, for example, it means maybe your supervisors also are not so happy. They have experienced that for a long time, and so they might be cynical, and in their cynicism, not realizing that it's impacting you, and in your stress levels, that is, magnified, because they're feeling like, okay, I need some kind of support here, but then you're not getting the support that you're wanting, wondering what's going on. So cynicism is really crucial when people are burned out.
And I think to add to that, Joyce was talking about people that have been in the field for a long time. Historically, that's where we looked at burnout, was people that had been in the field for so long just naturally would approach burnout. The literature currently has examined another population of folks, which is those who are just recently getting into their field, are also burning out at very high rates. Take a guess why.
It's a lot of new stuff.
It's all new. The expectations are unclear. They don't know some of the job duties that this entail. They're kind of learning it as they go. Can feel really, really self-doubting. They weren't prepared for this. I've heard so many people, I went through a master's degree and I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing. And they burn out because they have no idea what the specifics are of it until they're in it. So for those of you who are in particular positions where your job duties kind of change, ebb and flow, responsibilities change, those can be factors or contributors to burnout as well, because you're used to doing things and then, well, here's a new system, and here's a new process, and here's a new reporting structure, and here's a new, and you're constantly having to evolve with that can also lead to burnout as well. So helping to normalize some of that. Irritability we talked about. Decreased productivity and efficiency, we know is a side effect, and then lowered self-efficacy, which is our belief in our ability to do things. We start doubting our own skill set, are all kind of consequences of burnout. So, questions, comments? So we want to pass out this self-care wheel. We'll talk about this for a few minutes. So for the folks that are online, we didn't upload this into the PowerPoint, so what we'll do is we'll send this over to Angela, a digital copy, along with the PowerPoint, and anyone that wants it, we can hopefully just blast it out.
Yeah, I'll be sending out all the slides.
Yeah, so we'll send out the slides, the self-care wheel, so there's a digital version. If you notice, this is a two-sided document. One talks about kind of the actual domains that we have to consider when we're thinking about our self-care. And then the one on the back is a more structured self-care plan. We give this to clients that are experiencing burnout. And so what I thought we could do for a few minutes is think about some of the domains, things in those particular areas that help us feel better. They help decrease stress. Some of them will cross over across domains. Some will be social and psychological. So don't worry so much about where exactly they fall. Just start putting some things in here that help you to feel better and less stressed. The thing that I want to say as kind of a preface to this, when we talk about things like affirmations as kind of a skill that we use when we're talking about self-worth, it's one thing to write an affirmation, it's another thing to actually believe it. So I want this to be an exercise where these things are actual items that you would do. Not kind of the ideal, maybe 5 years down the road, I'd love to be able to do this, things that you can actually do now. So it's great to have those aspirational 5 years self-worth kind of exercises, and then there's the reality of what can we do now in our present situation. So spend a couple minutes, if you will, filling in this wheel, and then we'll talk about this.
And maybe for the folks online, maybe we can just read out the areas. There's the psychological, emotional, spiritual, personal, professional, and physical. Those are the areas. Okay, so if you are comfortable sharing, let's go through the domains. Like, what did people have? Self-care. How are you gonna take care of yourselves psychologically?
Something that's new to me, which is new to me, is meditating.
Meditating.
Yeah, like even whenever we started doing the quiet room,
Yeah,
I would take a 10-minute break reading, and I'd have a meditation app on my phone, and I would set it, and I would meditate, as my break, and it helps me just, clear my mind, and instead of being jumbled, I would have more focus.
Yeah. So it helps you to get centered. Yes.
Actually taking breaks and realizing the importance of taking breaks.
Taking a break.
Yeah. Just to clear your mind. Sometimes I used to not take breaks, and I would sit on my computer and not be
And work the whole
productive.
day.
Yeah.
Even it's just just going to the kitchen to go grab water or something. Yeah. Anybody else? What do you want to share about how you could use this? Like what's going on for you right now? How to take care of it?
Physically, I would say I just need to like notice when and pay attention to when I don't want to work out, because those are the times when I know that I'm going to burn out. So by acknowledging that and either like just going for a longer walk with my dog or actually just going and walking on the treadmill for a little bit. Like those are the literally like walking my dog more. That, yeah, just recognizing that I need that to calm myself down and get back to not burning out.
Yeah.
More sleep.
Sleep. More sleep. More sleep. Yeah.
That's a good one.
Being better about
So
disconnecting from my phone when I'm at home and kind of being more present in the environment that I'm in.
I think we should all use that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anybody else want to share with us? The team with the group? I don't know if anybody's online. Oh, yes, sorry, great.
Asking for help.
Asking for help. It's the hardest thing, asking for help. So that one goes back to what we were talking about earlier, like you have people pull back when they're stressed out, when they're burned out. But asking for help is one of the best things to do. But it's hard. Yeah.
I'd also say, I'd also say when I know that I'm going to burn out, I need to just be in my own little bubble. And I think the best way for me to do that is by working from home. So not being afraid to ask to work from home is one thing that I need to recognize. Like today, I really should have worked from home.
Not being afraid to ask to work from home. And sometimes we can be more productive while at home.
I need to remember to turn my email off if I'm on vacation or on a weekend because I will keep answering it and stress out over it, and then people might not get great answers.
And find out that you did more work, you did too more work at work. Yeah. Anything else?
Well, that goes back to the boundaries we talked about, right? That if you have established that you're always available, you will always be available. People will assume you're always available. Whereas if you say, you know what, nights and weekends are time for me and my family and my dogs and my cats, that's what it is. Right? And so some of this is letting go of our own perfectionism, right? That we have to be connected 24/7 or else things will fall apart. Part of that is us. And I think it goes back to that pride thing with asking for help. All of this kind of centers on some of the expectations we have of ourselves, more so than how others expect us to show up.
Yeah. Keep sharing. I had some
I wrote down
fancy idea here.
for cognitive tell myself when I do good, so not just when I do bad, but the good things I do.
So tell yourself when you do good and appreciate yourself. Tap yourself on the shoulder when you do good. Yeah. What else?
I put make more time to see people that I don't see very often and that I love and care about.
Mm-hmm.
That always makes me feel better when I feel like other parts of my life are falling together for me.
So we come back to that relational thing.
Yeah.
Engaging with others.
Yeah.
Connections. You know what you said, Sophia. One of the points that I have here says, learning to be kind to ourselves, which is sometimes missing. Anything else in the other domains that you can think of?
For spiritual, I said getting back to meditating.
Getting back to
I used to
meditating.
meditate a lot when I was stressed, and I haven't done that for a long time.
Yeah. And celebrating your own successes.
Did anyone fill out the part on the back, the actual self-care plan? What do you plan to do?
Yes, what do you plan to do?
That's the tangible part that we want you to be able to take away. Is anyone comfortable sharing maybe one thing that they are making an agreement to themselves today to do? Yes.
Take time to focus on myself more and what I actually need instead of getting to a point where it's just my tipping point before I burn out.
Okay.
From your list, you mind sharing with us?
Just one thing.
I put that as a goal for myself. I'm gonna make time to go back to therapy like twice a month.
Yeah, we're a little biased. We really like that.
You really like that idea.
Yeah.
We think it's awesome.
Yeah. Do you guys offer it here, like, as for students to?
We do have a
Hours?
counseling
We have
center
a
here on
counseling
campus,
center.
yes,
Oh,
for
for
students.
like us too.
For your $7.
Yeah,
For students.
for students, yes.
Okay.
We do have a list of community referrals, though, that we send some of our folks out to.
And Antioch has a counseling center, so our students sometimes we refer them there because other students work in the counseling center, so we don't want students seeing each other. So we send them to Antioch, and Antioch sends their people here too.
Yeah. Just so you know, if you're not comfortable running into folks, you know. Yes.
I think for myself, it's like to find out, like, to self-assess, like the self-assessment, like what works best for you, like how to deal with the stress and avoid burnout. So for me, it's like I've been stress baking and cooking. So that works for me.
Yeah.
And I think it's like finding what, different things that you can do to avoid to have like that breakdown.
Yeah.
It's like the main thing, and to hurt your family members, because with our stress or with the burnout, is I feel like the first person that is getting affected is like your spouse or your partner, or because they're getting all the negativity. So yeah, so I think it's to be fair with them. It's like for us to learn how to love ourselves.
Yes,
So true.
so true.
Good time.
Yes.
I've realized that sometimes removing yourself from a situation that's causing you stress is the best option. Like for me, I go to school here and I work full time at Seattle University, and I'm doing an internship that's related to my studies. Plus, I live in Tacoma, so commuting to Seattle every day is crazy. So there's not enough time for me to do anything.
Yeah.
And I've been holding on to my job for a while now, just because of societal, I say cultural factors, and making this much money, I need to continue making this much money. But now I realize that I need to do something. So January 4th, I'm actually leaving my job and just focusing on my internship and school. So I'm looking forward to that.
Making choices.
Yeah.
Something I recently did, I don't know if anybody mentioned it before, but I put my phone down when I'm at home as much as possible, especially when I'm, with my husband or my daughter. I try and put my phone down so that I am actually able to be present and enjoying the moments when I'm with them. Or even when I'm out with friends, out to dinner, I try not to have my phone right in front of me, constantly checking to see if somebody else is texting me or emailing me or something, just being present.
We were watching an episode of Fixer Upper last night with Chip and Joanna Gaines, who are my favorites, by the way. But they had just opened a restaurant, and one of the things that they've implemented is they have these pockets on the walls where people put their phone. It's above their table, but they put their phones in it so that they have to actually have dinner together without phones. And I thought it's such a simple concept, right? It's, for me personally, social media does not help me de-stress anymore. So I avoid it. When I'm at home and I've had a stressful day, I don't get on social media because it just adds to So, finding ways to interact with people, our dogs, our cats, our partners without our phones, I think is huge.
Yeah, I know that for me, I've just realized that when I get on the phone, my cat just meows. Meows. And at first I was wondering what it was about. If I'm on the computer, I think she knows I'm working for some reason. I'm just discovering. But when I get on the phone, oh my God, she just comes and I put the phone down and she stops. So I've connected that, okay. And my grandchild now is doing the same thing. And I get them on the phone because I was like, okay, I guess the phone is not good for me right now.
Well, as soon as I take my phone out when I'm with my daughter, she immediately has to be on top of me, because she realizes if you're not paying attention to me, not cool. So I'm just gonna be annoying now to make you pay attention. And if I put it away, she's fine. She does what she does.
So that is also happening to ourselves, though. When we get on the phone, the social media, we're not paying attention to ourselves. We are like buried in all the crap that's going on over there, and so we're not even paying attention to what's going on for us. And it's avoidance sometimes, avoiding what's going on, and just go on the phone and social media, and then the day ends.
Look at other people's problems, so you don't have to
Gives us some
deal with your own.
I think the biggest takeaway from this is giving ourselves permission to be a little selfish at times when it comes to preventing burnout. I mean, talking about your decision, I can only imagine there was an incredible amount of thought and planning that had to go into, is this worth it in the long run? And those are decisions that I think we have to be more comfortable having with ourselves in terms of our long-term happiness. And sometimes we're afraid to let go of some of those social cultural expectations or that perfectionism. And I tell folks all the time, you can't be 100% 100% of the time. There will be times when we just have to show up and we have to be okay with that. And I think sometimes we become our own worst enemy and contributor to that burnout. The expectations we place on ourselves are far greater than the ones anyone else is placing on us. If we went around and asked folks, how am I doing? They'd say, you're awesome. And we're saying, gosh, I feel like I'm not doing enough. I need to do more. That's our dialogue, not others. So
At the end here, I just wanted to read out, and you have it there. I thought that was powerful. It's always been powerful to me, the analogy of the well. So I was going to read it out loud in my accent so it can be embedded in your brains like forever. So here I go. A well sustains itself with a continuous flow of water when it has sources and is regularly replenished. The amount of reserve is a far more significant indicator of a healthy water supply than the force of water at any given moment. Without a reserve, the well dries up quickly and is no longer able to sustain. Well, human beings must have reserves because overall, wellness depends far more than on these reserves than on performance at any given moment. So I want that to dwell in your head. We do have to have sustenance. And so all the other things that like what your plan is, those are the things that you have to do in order to not let yourself really go to the bottom and no water in that well. Okay. And so I want you to think of burnout in this way. So that way you can always think of doing something for yourself so that the well always has water in it. Burnout is slow and steady erosion of the spirit and energy as a result of the daily struggles and chronic stress typical of everyday life and work. So Pines and Harrison, 1988, thought about that. So to me, what bites me there is to imagine that this thing actually feeds on my spirit. Because I know that when I am burned out, it starts from there. It's like from the inside, and then it takes over my whole self. So you imagine when you're exhausted, when we are spiritually exhausted, it goes into the physical. Sometimes we get physically exhausted. We're able to still do our thing every day. But when it goes to that spiritual place, in the center, it's like things fall apart. The center cannot hold. So let's think about that. It's on us. And so relational, this guy is a relational guy. Like he's always talking, whenever we're talking, and like I am like that because of our field too. But Dr. Corey always pushes that, like relational, like so when you are trying to hide yourself because you're burned out, think about how it would feel like if you reached out and what it would do for you.
We've got a couple minutes. Want to leave time for questions, and also if we could just have maybe a couple people tell us one thing that they're going to take away from today. So it's kind of two parts. Any questions? And if you would like to share one thing that you can take away from today. And folks online as well, weigh in on this.
I need to ask for help way more often than I do. Like, I ask help when it gets down to the point where it really needs to happen. So asking help before I get to that point, before any issues come up, is really.
Remember, the big part of that, like affirmations, writing it down and actually internalizing it are two different things. So saying it, then put it into action. So asking for help more often, okay?
I was just gonna ask, what are some things that you two do to help prevent burnout?
So still. But like for me, because that spiritual place is so important, because it impacts me, like I will feel very disconnected if I'm not spiritually centered. And so, like meditation, I do that. I do a lot of like, I go out into the woods. Like I have places where I go where I just feel like I get replenished, and yeah, and the exercising, but the spiritual, I'm also somebody who prays, and so I tend to also delve into that and read stuff that support me to understand myself, like really. And then I also reach out to friends to talk. Like when some stuff is going on for me, I talk. And Dr. Corey is new in our program, but he already knows that I talk. Yeah, so that, I don't know. There are so many things I do I can't explain.
It's funny you asked that. So I've given this presentation specifically to counselors. So instead of the Maslow burnout inventory, we have what's called the counselor burnout inventory. Because one of the things we talk about as counselors is that we're constantly sitting with folks who are going through a lot of stuff. And we start taking that stuff on and we burn out very quickly. And so we talk about self-care for counselors. Counselors are singularly the worst population in terms of applying self-care. We're great at teaching people. We're terrible at engaging in it. And so it's one of the things that I will be honest in saying I still am trying to figure it out. Because many of you shared aspects of folks that I'm guilty of. So my email comes to my phone. I'm always attached to it. And I have to consciously make decisions at times when I'm starting to approach burnout to say, I'm not looking at my phone after 5 o'clock. I'm just not. I have to put it down. I won't look at email. Another thing for me is physically getting away. So going to the waterfront, going to the mountains, getting physically out of the environment for a little bit to kind of, like you said, get in the woods, if you will, or up in the mountains, just away from the daily stressors has become very important to me. Spending time with folks that I enjoy being around. I have to intentionally seek those things out, especially when I'm approaching that point. So those are the things that I do.
And recently for me, I have a grandson. So I just look at him My whole world melts, and then I feel like, okay, I gotta keep going because this is my reason for doing everything that I do. So, like, he really just melts my heart. And even when I'm feeling so stressed out, I come from work, I go home, and I FaceTime with him. He's like, ah, I'm like, oh, okay, that is good.
Good question. Other questions, or again, one thing that you'll take away from today?
Trying to prioritize what is actually important instead of just flagging everything as important. What actually has to get done immediately instead of everything has to get done right now.
Right. That's a great one. Yeah.
The onliners are going to speak to their managers
Oh.
about being burnt out.
Yes. Good. I mean, that's empowerment. That's self-advocacy. Sometimes managers are just not aware, or they are aware and they're not sure how to address it. And so if we are comfortable kind of sharing what's happening, that can be really helpful. You know, it feels icky because there's that power differential sometimes.
I hate to say this, some managers are slave drivers.
But at least we spoke up.
I think when you said being okay with being selfish,
Yeah.
it's something that I always struggle with, seeing it as being selfish instead of realizing that if I am selfish sometimes, that it makes the people around me happier.
Yeah.
To have a happy Jen is happier for everyone. Yeah.
We have to take care of ourselves to take care of others. If we're neglecting ourselves in that process, we're definitely not there for others.
Recognizing that everyone experiences or faces some level of burnout makes me feel a lot better.
Yeah.
And being more comfortable talking to people who ask if help needed.
Yeah. We had some crispy all the way to extra crispy folks today. Not full like burnout, we need to do something very urgently, but kind of a varying degree of burnout was present in this room. So I think we're all kind of seeing how stress is impacting us. Other questions, thoughts? So we've got our contact information up here. We'll also send this again to Angela to send out to folks that attended. So you have all the PowerPoint slides and the handouts. We're here. So if you need us for anything, let us know. We're happy to sit down and chat. Happy to do other presentations that are needed. So just let us know. We were excited to come and do this with you guys today. So thank you so much.
Thank you for
Thank
coming.
Thank you, everyone.